And welcome back to All Business Media TV. I'm your host, Rick Delgado, and joining us once again here in our New York studio is Dr. Christine Silverstein. She is the director at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance out of Oakland, New Jersey. You can reach out to her directly, either through her website, fertilebodyhypnosis.com. She's actually got two of them. And there's also idealperformance.net, which you can go to online as well, or call her up at 201-760-1600. Again, Dr. Christine Silverstein, welcome back to the program, and how are you?
I'm doing very well today, thank you.
All right,
it's
well,
nice and sunny.
Yeah, and thank you again for making your way back to our New York studio. We are in part 4. This is a 6-part series we've been doing together.
Yes.
That started some time ago, and this is part 4 today. Now, before we get started, though, just give everybody who might be tuning in for the very first time, maybe they don't know who you are and the work that you do. Tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do as the director at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance.
Yes, of course. I am a peak performance coach and a clinical hypnotherapist, as well as a registered nurse, and I focus on behavioral modification in my work, helping people to reach their ideal performances in business, in health and wellness, as well as education, performing arts, and athletics. And I have many programs I've worked with over the last 22 years, including programs such as Operation Heal, and I work with many teenagers, and I have athletic programs as well.
All right, and you've been doing this for a while now, right?
Yes, for 22 years.
Right, so again, you've helped people across the spectrum, whether it's, professional, kids taking exams, people, performing arts, sports, you name it, and then of course with people who are infertile, right?
Yes.
And that's a lot of what we've been talking about.
Yes.
Now, before we get started, again, this is part 4 of a 6-part series, but can you give us a quick little recap of what we went over in part 3?
Yes, of course. We talked about many things, starting with the myths associated with the use of hypnosis and the stigma attached to it, and how I overcame it when I first started my hypnotherapy practice, and things that were said to me about people didn't want to look into my Svengali eyes, and people were ready to run out of my office, fearful that I would steal their purses, things like that. But over the years, I've been able to really calm people down and educate people as to what the value is of the work that I do.
Right.
And we also talked about my early years as a student nurse and how I overcame some really big challenges working with people in the hospital. And my initial education was focused on holistic nursing, body, mind, working with the body, mind, and spirit.
Right.
And I had some experiences where I had to really learn what to do, what to say, and I didn't have the tools then that I have now.
Right.
But I could have helped some people get through surgery and pain management as a young nurse. And then we went on to talk about all the things that we've been talking about on the air, about how you can use the power of your mind in many different areas. And one of the areas we focused on was this fact that when I was younger, I knew to relate to nature, and we talked about how the French parks were a part of nature in the 19th century, and how I used imagery going from the nurse's residence to the hospital and talking to the birds and the trees and relating to nature, and how I use that in my work today. And also how this mind-body connection can be used as a preventative for drug addiction and the opioid crisis, and how over the course of time people can learn coping strategies, and it will be very helpful, not just as a solution to the crisis, but as a preventative.
Right.
And we went on to talk also about this idea that by using the power of the mind, you can help yourself to walk when you think you can't, and you can help yourself have babies when you think you can't, and also win championships when all is lost. And how to remedy that by using the power of your mind and using mind-body techniques that I've been talking to you about since January on the radio shows.
That's right. We do a lot of discussion about your work on the radio show once a week, but we also have been doing this series. So today, what are we going to cover? And as we do cover those things, what events kind of, led you to working with fertility enhancement?
Well, today we're going to talk about my program, Metamorphosis Fertility Enhancement Coaching.
Okay.
And we're going to, as I said to you before, go from Paris, France, and the beautiful gardens and parks there we discussed last time,
Right.
to the mountains of Peru. And
we're
yes,
going around the world
we're going
today.
to be traveling
All right,
today
so this will be good.
to
I've never been to Peru.
Another destination, right? So I became interested really through my personal experiences, and also looking at the literature and knowing people who had issues with fertility over the years. But most of it, really the motivation for having a program for fertility enhancement coaching came from my personal experiences and my procreative journey during my reproductive years, having 4 miscarriages and the diagnosis of infertility.
Right.
And it really started with the very first miscarriage that I had. It was on a wintry day, and I went skiing in Vermont to kind of get a break from my job. And it was a holiday weekend. And it had snowed the day before, but the next day when I was skiing, the snow had melted and then it froze overnight.
Right.
And so the slopes were very slippery. And so I came down for my first couple of runs and I was fine. But at one point I fell on a slippery slope, so to speak, and I hit the ground really hard, and it really frightened me. It was such an impact. And I slid down to a place where I could ski again, and I got over it. But the following Monday, I was at work. I worked for the Visiting Nurse Service of New York,
Right.
and I was a community health nurse. And part of my job was to visit a senior center, assisted living facility. And so as I got to the lobby of the building, I had really severe cramps, abdominal cramps. So I went into the lobby bathroom, and I was in there for a very long time. And in the bathroom, I had a miscarriage. And I never told anybody about it because I had the thought that I might be pregnant when I went skiing. And I told myself, I should have known better. I'm a nurse.
Right.
I shouldn't have gone skiing. So I really blamed myself. And I kept that a secret for many, many years. So the idea was that looking back now, I see how I needed to work on that issue, but I just blocked it out totally, like what we were talking about in the last part, where there's this unconscious trauma that you want to block out and you don't want to speak about.
Right. Yeah, and that's got to be tough to carry around, especially like you said, being a nurse, and you kind of know in your mind, there's certain things I should and shouldn't be doing.
Right, and I just went about my day, at that point. And now looking back, oh my gosh, it was important to review it.
Right. Now, what happened with the second miscarriage? Because you said you had 4, right?
Yes. Well, the second miscarriage happened at work as well. I started to have bleeding, and I remember calling the doctor, going home for bed rest. And that night, in the middle of the night, I woke up from a nightmare, and I felt literally something detaching from inside my uterus. It felt like a detachment and kind of a clunk inside my body. And I ran into the bathroom and I started to hemorrhage into the toilet. And I felt very upset. I was brought as an emergency to the hospital, and I had a D&C, which is a dilatation and curettage of the uterus. And they put me on a maternity ward. So the next morning, I got up to go to the bathroom, and there was a woman there who was so jolly, and she said to me, "Oh, I had a little baby girl.
Right.
What did you have?" And I just looked at her, and I said, "Well, I don't know the sex of what I had, but I had a miscarriage. The baby died."
Right.
So she didn't know what to say to me, and I didn't know how to respond to her.
Yeah, that's got to be a difficult situation to find yourself in. Now, what about stress? Do you think that stress contributed to those miscarriages?
Yes, I do think stress had something to do with it. Although, as I was experiencing it, I didn't consider that.
Right.
But looking back, I didn't give myself any time to heal. And I had to report back to work soon after these miscarriages. And my work entailed visiting mothers and babies, helping them with their newborns.
Right.
And that was very challenging for me at that time emotionally.
Yeah.
And also, my job was very stressful. I worked in a depressed area of the South Bronx, and it was dangerous at that time. So one day when I was calling off at the end of the day, calling my office to go home, before I went home, I was at the Yankee Stadium subway station, which is the area where I worked.
Right.
And I went to the newspaper stand to get change for the phone. It was an outdoor phone. And I dropped some of the change on the ground, and then I picked it up and I went around the corner. It was a very blustery day. It was windy and raining, and the umbrella was turning inside out. And I'm on an outdoor phone trying to maneuver the umbrella. And I put the coins in the phone, and a man approached me from the left, and he got right in my face, and he said the money that I put in the phone was his, and he wanted it back. And I said very politely, "I'm sorry, sir, but it's my money, and it's in the phone, and excuse me, but I'm talking on the phone."
Right.
And with that, he punched me in the face.
Are you serious?
Yes,
Oh,
with
my
such
goodness.
force that I saw stars, and I thought my nose was broken, and my glasses flew off. And so the supervisor said, "You have to call the police," right? So I remember going off to the Fort Apache police station. That's what it was called at that time, to give you some indication of what the area was like. And I was there until 10 o'clock at night, identifying the suspects. And I remember leaving there and thinking, now I have to go home in the subway by myself, after all this. But the job was stressful in the sense that I had to climb lots of stairs with a heavy bag on my shoulder. I used public transportation, and that was very crowded, and therefore I was very stressed out at the time. It took its toll on me.
I would imagine so. Now, with something like that, I mean, that's got to be, you know, again, you're talking about stress. You're talking about being in the South Bronx. You're getting punched by what, a homeless guy?
Yes, a homeless person.
Was that right after the second miscarriage?
That was around this time. Now looking back.
Okay, so that's another stressor. Then you've got work, which is stressful enough as it is. Man, oh man, it's just it was like all the negative factors that you could have had going on.
That's right.
At that time, kind of coming together to really cause you a lot of issues. Now, did you do anything? Were you able to do anything once you had I guess they gave you some time off after getting punched in the face, right?
No, I was back to work the next day.
I was going to say, geez, they should give you some time off so you can sit back and evaluate and be like, okay, what kind of things can I do to alleviate all this stress? Because you're getting pounded.
That's right.
Literally.
That's right. Well, I worked through that issue, and for some time they did give me an escort to walk around the neighborhood with me. But it was still challenging.
Now, were there any other things that you could do to alleviate that stress, maybe at work?
Well, yes, I was able to move, is what I did. Eventually, I quit my job. My husband had just finished his doctoral studies in engineering, and we moved to New Jersey. So when I got there, I calmed myself down. I took some time off.
Right.
And I became pregnant again, but the same thing happened. I had another miscarriage.
Right.
The bleeding started, the bed rest, and then rushed to the hospital with hemorrhage and a D&C. And so that was very challenging for me, and I didn't know what to do.
Right.
So my mother told me that her neighbor was a doctor, a GYN physician, and he was on Long Island. So I made an appointment with this doctor to see what I could do. And when I got to the doctor's office, I had the examination, and after he completed the exam, he said that I need all this testing, and he said, and you have to take the drug DES, diethylstilbestrol, if you want to have a baby. And I protested because I was really knowledgeable about the research on this drug.
Right.
And even though it had been used for many years, they were finding that it caused birth defects and cancer in offspring. And so I said this to the doctor, and he just totally ignored me. He said, this is the only treatment, and if you really want to have a baby, you have to do this.
Right.
So I took the prescription, and I left the office. I never returned, and I never filled the prescription. And I was really at wit's ends because I didn't know how to approach this issue. And also, I was concerned that there weren't very many options left.
Right. Now, was there anything that you could do to kind of, I don't know, I guess the right way to describe it is kind of balance things out?
Yes, to balance things out was the only option, really. IVF was not really functioning. It was in the early stages of development.
Right.
And they didn't have home pregnancy tests at that time. You had to go to the doctor to figure out if you were pregnant.
Right.
And so...
Just to see if the rabbit died, right?
That's right. Well, that's what they always say. Well, I don't know that's, I guess years ago they probably tested that way.
Right.
But at any rate, I knew I had to go do it alone. And I developed my own mind-body program. And that was the only way I was going to help myself.
Right.
So I was now in my 4th pregnancy, sometime after this.
Right.
And I was totally petrified, especially at night, because I was frightened that I would have another miscarriage in my bed, you know, as previously had happened.
Right.
And so I couldn't sleep, and I decided to learn some techniques. One was transcendental meditation.
Okay.
And I studied that, and I practiced that diligently twice a day. And then I also looked up in the telephone book in the yellow pages a psychologist who taught self-hypnosis. And I don't know why I thought to do that, but I figured something needs to be done, and maybe that will help.
Right.
So I found my way to this psychologist's office, and I took sessions there. And that was very helpful for me to calm myself down at night, and I was able to sleep better. And I knew that was going to be helpful to me to reduce the stress.
Right.
So with that, I just became more conscious of my own fertility. And I changed my eating habits, and I took supplements, and I did a lot of reading, and also my lifestyle. I did no more skiing at that point, right? And I ended up having a spontaneous pregnancy, full-term pregnancy, and my first child was born, my son, and it was such an accomplishment to hold him in my arms.
Right.
And I had 3 babies after that, 3 daughters, which I'm very happy to say are beautiful.
I would imagine. I mean, especially after that first one. Now, what about the 4th miscarriage? Because you did mention there were 4.
That's right.
When did that occur?
I had another miscarriage between the 2nd and 3rd child, and that came as a very big surprise to me.
Right.
I wasn't ready for it, and I went to the doctor in the emergency room. It was a holiday weekend. And the doctor examined me, and he said, "You're not pregnant. I don't think you're pregnant. You're just having a very bad experience here, a very bad period." And I said, "No, I think I'm pregnant. I know that I'm pregnant." So he told me that I should go home and just have a regular day, right? And everything would be fine. So I left because I knew he wasn't going to listen to me.
Right.
And it was around Halloween, so my children wanted to get pumpkin from the pumpkin farm. So we went to the pumpkin farm, we waited on a long line, and I was having severe cramping the whole time. So we picked up this little pumpkin and finally got home, and I went to bed. And towards the evening, I felt a little better, thinking, well, maybe the doctor was right, although I didn't really believe it.
Right.
Because the next morning, I got up, we were getting ready to go to the mall, and I aborted the baby in the toilet.
Oh, Jesus.
And so with that, I screamed, and my children came running in, and my husband was home. And so I called the doctor, right? So,
well, what did the doctor say? I mean...
Well, it was the same doctor there in the emergency room, and he said, "That's impossible. It's impossible because I examined you, and you had no signs and symptoms of pregnancy." So he said, "Women drop large pieces of tissue out of them all the time." He knows that from his experience. So I insisted. I said, "Doctor, I know I was pregnant." He said, "Well, then collect the specimen from the toilet and bring it into the lab for analysis," which is what I did.
Right.
My husband went to the recycle bin and used a ricotta cheese container. And every time I eat Italian food, I think of that.
Yeah,
And so we brought this to the lab. And a few days later, I got a call from the doctor. He said, "Mrs. Silverstein, I am so sorry, but the lab shows that that was fetal material." And I was standing at the stove cooking dinner for my daughter's second birthday, and I just remember bursting out into tears.
Right.
and feeling very upset. And I made carrots that night for my daughter, cooked carrots, and she vomited them all over her high chair. And she never ate carrots since then.
Right.
So I know that she was very distressed by what had happened.
Right. I guess she was kind of picking up on your energy.
She was.
Yeah. So now, what made this miscarriage different?
Well, because I had 2 children, I really dismissed this whole thing.
Right.
I just said, I don't have to mourn or grieve. I put it aside. I said it didn't matter. I'm too busy.
Right.
So I never consciously worked on it. And shortly after that, I became pregnant again. So now, being pregnant, I had a full-term pregnancy, but it was very challenging.
Right.
I had many issues, and I had a very challenging postpartum period as well. So each time I had these miscarriages, I had to really dig deep inside to bring that mighty mass from within.
Yeah. And now, what did you feel during the time of the miscarriages? Because that's got to be challenging as well. And even you said, you know what, you could just kind of tell, right?
That's right. That's right. You know your own body. So now I call them miscarriages of justice, right? Because I never gave them the attention they deserved.
Right.
And people told me it was God's will that these babies died, but I blamed myself. I dismissed these major reproductive experiences in my life, and that affected my fertility. So I shamed myself when I had the ski accident, and I blamed myself for skiing when I should have known better.
Right.
And I remember feeling totally insulted by the doctor. When I told him I was pregnant, he didn't believe me. It was my 6th pregnancy, and I was a nurse.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right?
You're in the medical field. I think you might know at this point.
That's right. That's what I felt. And also, I was petrified to sleep in the bed where there was an indelible blood stain from the hemorrhaging. I tried to cover it over with plastic. And so those were the challenges. And as I look back, I had the courage to go through these things, and I'm glad that I did.
Right.
But now I'm reflecting back so that other women can understand that it's very important to look at the trauma and to release it.
Right, and to deal with it.
And to deal with
if you try and bury it, you end up carrying it around.
That's right.
And never really,
That's right.
addressing what that trauma is. Now, what led you to recovery of the trauma?
Well, the reproductive process here that we're talking about lasted for about a period of 10 years.
Okay.
So that included 8 pregnancies, 4 miscarriages, and 4 live births.
Right.
Yet, I never found out the cause of these miscarriages. But I always considered myself lucky because I did have live births. And many people in this situation are not able to carry through a full-term pregnancy.
Right.
So I learned how to use the power of my mind, which is a benefit to me. And also, I got in touch with my own fertility, which I call fertility consciousness. And years later, I met a woman whose mom took the ES, the drug that the doctor prescribed.
Right.
And she had cancer of the cervix in her 20s and cancer of the intestines in her 30s. So I was very glad I did not take that drug.
Right. Was that one of the side effects of using that drug?
That's right.
The cancer?
Yes, cancer in your offspring.
Oh wow, and your offspring as well. Wow, that's that's kind of scary, especially when there aren't a lot of back then there probably weren't a lot of other options, right?
No, and they were thinking this was effective.
Right. Wow. Again, we're here with our guest, Dr. Christine Silverstein. She is the director at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance. If you do want to reach out to her directly, her phone number, 201-760-1600, or go to her websites, two of them. One is idealperformance.net. The other is more in line with what we're talking about right now, and that's fertility. It's fertilebodyhypnosis.com, so reach out to her directly. Of course, as you can tell, she does kind of have a bit of expertise in this particular field. Now, let me ask you this, Dr. Christine, what's your message for women? From everything that you've experienced.
Well, my message is it's very important to begin the fertility journey as early as possible. Now, some people want to wait for their partner, the best partner, etc. But the earlier, the better. And it benefits women greatly to be aware of their own fertility before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and even afterwards. So I call this in-touch feeling fertility consciousness, and I look at pregnancy as a natural process, and I see infertility as a balancing act, right? So I don't see it as a disease. It's more keeping yourself in balance. And my daughters were gymnasts, so I always told them when you fall off the balance beam, you need to look at what you did to fall off before you get back on, and that you must have this expectant mind to score, and also look at what you were doing, what you were thinking, what you were feeling when you fell off. And so to do this, you offset this idea that when you touch that balance beam, you'll fall off in a positive mindset. And I believe the same thing is necessary for women who want to have that expectant mind and be expecting a baby. Now,
do you think that there is an over-reliance these days on, say, using medicine and the IVF approach?
Yes, I definitely do. There's the choice these days that I didn't have, when I was younger. But it's for people who can afford it, because it is very expensive. On average, $12,000 a cycle.
Wow.
And so with IVF, you lose that in-touch feeling, and you place it in the hands of others. So it is called third-party reproduction, right? So it upsets your natural balance when you relinquish control. And it also upsets your normal cycle. It suppresses it, and then you're flooded with drugs. So the idea is that IVF in and of itself does not improve fertility, especially for those who have unknown reasons of why they're having the challenges. And if by chance you have a baby, then it doesn't really work on the fertility issues. So we know that there are issues with women who are off balance, and they just need to rebalance themselves. And there's this idea of this big art and big pharma, distributing these drugs. And when you look at that, they very often downplay the failures, and women lose their voice with this diagnosis of infertility. It just makes them feel vulnerable and stigmatized. And couples go through so much to have a baby: bankruptcy, foreclosures, health issues, and bitter disappointment with unsuccessful attempts. So they'll even, as I said before, stand on their heads to become pregnant.
And again, that's lending, like you said, about there's that stress level too. Because, and there's no guarantees it's going to work, And that's one of the big, I think, misnomers with IVF is that they think, well, if I do it, well then poof, presto, I'm going to be pregnant. But but it only increases, from what I understand, the chances of fertility only go up a small percentage amount, right?
Yes, and it does depend on your mindset and how you work with it and what your challenges are. But I believe natural is the best route, at least initially.
Oh yeah, definitely. Now, what are some of the physio-social aspects of female infertility?
Well, we live in a world where misogyny and paternalism are rampant, especially these days, and it's kind of accepted by many people. And there's a decrease in the growth rate in the United States and around the globe, and children are very fortunate to be born these days because of the decrease in birth rate. And also, women are choosing to be child-free.
Right.
And they're making these choices to stay in the workforce longer, which really affects their ability during their reproductive years. And so the idea is that you have this staying in the workforce. You're being encouraged by big art to have babies at any age, and then you can have donated eggs,
right.
and you can have babies into your 50s or 60s if you want. And I know of cases of that, even up to the age of 70. So with all these choices that you have, know that when you're older, you have a decrease in fertility, and you also have higher chances of miscarriages, stillbirths, and health conditions for you and the baby.
Right.
So we don't know the deleterious effects of what happens when you take these drugs. And recently I heard, and I read an article about how chemotherapy for first-stage breast cancer was given for many years as a treatment of choice, and now they're finding
for what? Infertility?
No, for breast cancer.
Okay.
A drug was given for breast cancer
Right,
as a
okay.
treatment of first-stage breast cancer, and now the scientists are saying, oh, it doesn't even help. As a matter of fact, it might give you leukemia or other health issues, right? And we have a history of that in this country with hormonal replacement therapy, with DES, and also early birth control pills after you're taking them for 10 years, and they tell you, well, there are chances you might get cancer
Right,
taking
yeah.
it.
And you don't learn about it till much later when all of a sudden now they've got time to have that research done.
The
and they can look
longitudinal
back at the
studies.
Right, and then see the effects, the long-term effects.
Yes.
That again, people don't find out about until too late. Now, how do you apply your learning, of everything you do to metamorphosis?
Well, metamorphosis is a symbol for evolution, from the caterpillar to the beautiful fertile butterfly.
Right.
And I had a banner year in 2013. I became a real estate agent. One of the purposes was to be able to negotiate a new office,
Okay.
to purchase a new office. And since I bought this beautiful office that I renovated, I said, now I want to revamp my programs. And one of the first programs I revamped was my fertility enhancement coaching program. And that year, in 2013, I signed up for a course that was given in England, or you could take it online. It's a 4-month course on the fertile body method. And I knew that would really help me to have kind of the skeleton, like the skeleton is to the body support, that this would be very good for my program. So I got certification in that. And I also went to a marketing exhibition that was basically for IVF. It was called Fertility Planet, PLANIT.
Okay.
And at this exhibition, they were talking about successes of IVF, etc. But there were people in the audience who were saying, we went natural, right? And so I was directed to go to a forum meeting in Manhattan as well. It's called The Silent Sorority, in which it was a documentary, and it's being filmed, in which women spoke up for the first time about their unsuccessful attempts with IVF, talking about 10 cycles, talking about 5 miscarriages with no baby, and they were very distressed. So I knew then that my program could be very helpful to these women. And the last thing that happened was I went to Portugal, and on the way, my hand swelled up 3 times the size from a previous injury on my bone. And I went to get X-rays.
Was this a skating accident?
No,
Okay.
this wasn't. This was actually shopping. I hit my hand on the clothing rack really hard. And so since I was there in Lisbon, I went to visit Our Lady of Fatima. I always wanted to go there as a child. And I prayed for healing, and I did get a healing.
Wow.
And I made this promise. Okay, so now, in return, I'll really promote my fertility enhancement program, and that's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today.
Right. Now, how do women, when it comes to fertility, how do they get out of sync with it?
Well, you get out of sync very easily. First of all, they're duped into believing that IVF is the way to go as a first choice. and that you can have a baby at any time through technology. And they also opt for IVF rather than natural approaches, simply because they lose faith in themselves. And women work very long in the workforce these days, and it's very expensive to raise children. Cheaper childcare is at a premium in this country. And so there are societal opposing goals with misogyny, with sexual abuse and molestation, and inequality and with your rights as a woman, and also the glass ceiling, right? So yet women, they're expected to pull their weight in the workforce and at home without receiving the benefits that men receive. So another thing is women lack the knowledge to be their own fertility experts, and they're not educated about how to become pregnant or how to avoid it. And it remains a taboo for women to speak up about infertility or the miscarriages or anything else. I remember saying to somebody, a man, actually he was a doctor, and he said, oh, it happens all the time, you know, and you know, they give you the statistics. So all of these things combined really work against being in balance and having that fertility consciousness.
Yeah, and up that stress level that you mentioned many times before. Now, what is suggested by an expert to improve fertility enhancement?
Well, there's this wonderful doctor. Her name is Christiane Northrup. She's an MD.
Okay.
And she is a visionary, in my opinion, and an authority on women's health and wellness. And she wrote this wonderful book that I reference all the time called Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And this book empowers women to trust their own inner knowing and in body, mind, and spirit. And she states that the menstrual cycle is the most basic earthly cycle that females have. And this is reflected in the cycles of nature, like the waxing and waning of the moon, and also the ebb and flow of the tide.
Right.
So the tide mirrors the menstrual cycle's flow as a human procreative endeavor, and many cultures view women's cycles as sacred.
Okay. Well, you know what? It's all very interesting because, you know, when you're talking about women's fertilities, or fertility, I should say, you know, there are other things that affect it. You mentioned stress again as probably the biggest thing when it comes to it. But there's also, you know, something to do with the moon, right? From what I understand.
That's right.
How does the moon get involved?
That's right. Well, even in these modern times, when women are totally out of sync with their rhythms, right, the cycle of ovulation is influenced by the moon. Studies have shown that peak rates of ovulation and conception occur on the full moon or the day before. And also scientific research demonstrates and documents that the moon rules the flow of fluids and affects things like the unconscious, dreams, and fertility. And the timing of the menstrual cycle, the fertility cycle, labor, and emotions are keyed into moon-dominated tides of the ocean.
Really?
Yes. And so on a physical level, during the time of the follicular stage where the egg grows, deep inside the wall of the uterus, these tiny little immune cells are already growing, right, to prepare. And the cycle mirrors how consciousness becomes matter and how thought creates reality.
Okay.
So to understand the nature of women's cycles, let's look at how women in ancient cultures viewed life and fertility.
Right. So now explain how did women in ancient cultures connect with fertility consciousness? Was this something that? You got a prop.
Yes, I have something. So as we work with this,
what do we got?
Right, we have.
I love when she brings her. I feel like the Joker. Where did she get these wonderful toys?
Well, recently I visited Peru, and I went to the sacred site of Machu Picchu.
Ah, you know what? I've always wanted to go there. That's amazing.
So we have here what the Peruvian guide called the Temple of Three Windows.
Okay.
And women would come to this temple and pray and chant and get in a meditative state. And they pray for increased fertility, but also for animals and food and water and ecological stability, and also goods, so they could have cotton to make their textiles.
Right.
And if you look at this, there are three windows, and in the middle window you can look out at a mountain that's dedicated to women, to Mother Earth. And you can see it in this picture here, right here.
Oh,
that's the mountain.
That's a very tall peak.
Yes, they're very tall mountains there. I think it's about 11,000 feet above sea level. So you can see that this mountain and the whole range and everything was very sacred there and beautiful. But women could get in balance. They could relate to nature. They could get back to their balance within nature,
right.
which is something that we lose these days.
Yeah.
Now, in Peru, they call the female goddess of nature is called Pachamama. And Pachamama was the Incan goddess. And when the Spanish conquered Peru, they brought the Virgin Mary.
Right.
So now today, when they do celebrations, they use both. Right. So they're united. And I saw many celebrations there, parades, almost every place we went. And they had the idol of the Blessed Mother, and they also did Incan dances in their attire, the ancient clothing.
That must have been a fascinating trip.
Yes, it was very fascinating.
Now, what about the Peruvian women? How do they align with Mother Earth today in terms of fertility?
Well, I visited another area of Peru called the Uros Islands at Lake Titicaca. And they are floating.
I've heard of that too. I want to go there too.
And they are
go to
floating.
every place I want to go.
Okay, well, you'll follow. As I said, you can bring Mary Moo with you.
Yes.
So,
and Damu.
Yes, and Damu too. And so there's an ancient temple on the lake, and it's a fertility temple. And women went there and performed rituals to become pregnant. And the islands are balanced on reeds, literally, the roots and the reeds.
Right.
And that's why they call them the floating islands. So every month or so, women replace the surface of the reeds. And when you walk on the reeds, you sink. You have that sinking feeling. And so they don't have toilets or sanitation. You have to go to the nearby reef to get to the bathroom, to the outhouse, by boat.
That's
right?
interesting.
So it's an ancient civilization. And we were fortunate enough to be exposed to the women who were there to entertain the tourists on this day.
Right.
And so we were sitting on this pile of reeds, and the women were presenting their wares, their textiles. And so one of them invited us into her little home. It was about an 8x10 home. I have a picture of it here.
Oh, wow.
Built of reeds on the walls and also the ceiling. And as you can see, it's upside down. And as you can see,
I couldn't tell if it was upside down. You could have held it that way for hours. I would have never known.
Because in the rafters, that's the closet,
Oh, okay.
right? So she had clothing all around the rafters.
Right.
And also, they had a bed. There was one bed, about a queen size. And as I said, it was about 8x10. She raised 4 children.
In that one room.
Yes, and then in the corner there was a television with hats piled up and a solar generator.
How do they have a TV?
Well,
they
that's right. They're miles from the shore, right? So the women, they had displayed their textiles. So you can see here Maria, whose home I visited.
Right.
She's displaying her textiles and trying to sell them, and the reeds in the back, and she's sitting on reeds.
Now, is that right in front of her home? Is that where
This is right near her
she's
home.
putting it in front of? Okay.
And all the women invited the guests to their homes, and they showed them their own textiles. So there is a table runner right here.
Okay.
That I purchased, that I brought with
Oh,
me.
you got one. Okay, so we have one of these. Let's
That
check it
I
out.
purchased this one.
And she made this all
She made
handmade?
this, yes, and it says Uros Lake Titicaca here, and you can see.
Can I touch it?
And yes, it's very nice and soft.
Oh, that does
And
feel nice.
you can see on here that there are the reeds, and also the reed house, and the birds of prey that they eat,
Right.
they hunt, and also the fish. So So I thought this was very beautiful, handmade.
Now, what do you do with something like this? Is it something you hang on your wall?
Well, I'm using it as a table runner in my dining room.
Okay. All right, but don't spill any gravy on them. I'm
Right,
sure you don't
exactly.
want to have to scrub that to get that out.
Exactly.
Now, let me ask you this, because that's kind of an ancient culture. They
Yes.
really are connected with
Yes.
the earth more than we are.
Yes.
What about women here in our culture? Can they realign with nature?
Well, yes, they can. And actually, see, these women here, I have another picture of them all lined up showing their textiles. And here's Maria. And you can see that there are 3 babies here, right?
Where?
Right here is a little boy. He was about 1 year old. And then a little girl.
Okay, I see the girl.
And then on the back of this mother, the Peruvians
is that a papoose?
It's like, that's where they carry the babies in a big shawl.
Right.
And I only saw 2 baby carriages, even in the cities.
Wow.
They carry the babies up to maybe about 2 years old on their backs. So there's the 3rd baby right there on this small island. So yes, you can get back to nature and get back to balance. And one way to do it is through my program, Metamorphosis Fertility Enhancement Coaching,
Okay.
where you learn to align your body, and you also learn to incorporate the mind-body techniques that I teach, self-hypnosis, cognitive behavioral therapy, and you make it part of your everyday life.
Right.
Right. So there are 6 stages in the fertile body method that we've discussed before, and if anybody wants to see some of the imagery I use, they can look at my video, how to reach your peak performance through fertility enhancement coaching. That's on my website.
Now, which website? Is it on both websites?
I think it's on both websites.
Okay, so both websites, fertilebodyhypnosis.com and idealperformance.net, those, if you want to check out that video, right?
Yes, and so there are 6 stages. It's outcome, balance, resolve, enhance, prepare, and support. So depending on the person's situation, I work with all of these stages, or sometimes just a few of them.
Right.
And using hypnotic relaxation, age regression imagery. And these stages cover from preconception all the way through to childbirth and beyond.
Okay.
And they're applicable to all women, not just women who have fertility issues, but particularly for those who have unexplained infertility. And I'd like to talk about how I work with these stages.
Okay. So let's dive into that. How do you work in these stages?
Okay, so the I'll give you some examples, right? The first example is I worked with a 42-year-old woman,
Okay.
who had issues with weight, and she wanted to release some weight. So on the interview, which is stage 1 outcome, where I do a solution-focused interview and identify goals, she happened to mention, besides this weight releasing, that her mom really wanted her to have a baby.
Right.
And she was conflicted about it. She had gone to a doctor, an IVF doctor, and he said she had low ovarian reserve and that she needed IVF. And so I worked with her on the primary issue, which was weight releasing, and she was very pleased. She changed her eating habits and
Right.
she released some weight. But then she really wanted to go further to work with this conflict. Right, so then I brought her into the next stage, balance, and I showed her hypnotic relaxation and imagery, and I used as a basis for the imagery Robert Frost's poem, A Road Not Taken. And so I took her down a road in her mind, and where the road bifurcates, and on the left, she wandered down the road, and she saw what her life would be like without children. And she was very happy. She was married. She liked her career. And so she was looking around, and all the way to the distance, like 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how will your life be? And then I brought her back, and we went on the other road on the right. And on this road, she had children, and what was she doing, and how was she feeling, and what was her life like with children, and what was her life projected 5 years, 10 years forward. And by the end of the session, she decided that she wanted to be child-free, and that she felt a sense of relief, and she was very happy to make that decision. And so there was another issue she wanted to work on beyond that.
Now, how did you resolve that other issue?
Well, the issue that she had was she had a breast cyst that the doctor told her she needed to have excised if it was still present on her next visit.
Right.
And so I worked with stage 3, which is resolve. And I told her that we could go on a little journey that I call the pond of love, right?
Okay.
So I have my little,
we've got another
here.
prop.
Yep, we do. So I have my little boat here.
What do we got? We got a boat?
Yep, a rowboat, right?
A rowboat with
a little rowboat
with a bear.
With a little
It's a bear in a boat.
a little angel bear, right?
Let's move this so the bear in the boat can
So in the imagery,
float along.
I have her right hand, because it's like a spa rowboat, and you float into the middle of this pond of love that's just oozing love from the mist and the water.
Right.
And her right hand is kind of in the water, and she's bringing in all this love and filling up her heart chakra, and filling up love for herself. And then there's no room for more love. She has to let go of some of the traumas. So out the left hand into the water is all the trauma, all the toxin, all the fears going into the water. And then I used imagery to help her to shrink the breast cyst, and applying different ointments and applications, and then also feeling better, feeling happy. The blue bird of happiness flies by, and she was able to feel better, and she went to the doctor shortly after that, and the breast cyst had totally disappeared. And the doctor was surprised when she couldn't find the breast cyst, but she did say that she had heard of cases where this has occurred, in practice.
That's right. Now, are there other examples in terms of which it's been something that you've been able to resolve?
Yes. Well, there are other examples. Yes, I've worked going forward with IVF. I've worked with a woman who had challenges with fertility for many years. She had polycystic ovarian syndrome from the age of 18, and now she was 42 going on 43.
Oh my goodness.
And the doctor gave her no chance of a very slim chance of having a baby.
Right.
And most people think that when they go this IVF route that they don't have to do very much of anything, right? They think, oh, I'll just take the injections and the drugs and that's it.
It works, it's magic.
But actually it's quite the opposite, because you still have to produce these eggs to be fertilized in the lab. So that was this woman's challenge. She was not able to produce viable eggs.
Okay, so what did you do to help?
Well, in the next stage, enhance, I was able to show her imagery. We work with imagery.
There's another problem.
That's right.
Do we need to move the bear on the boat?
We can move a little bit. And this is the imagery of the fried egg.
Oh, the egg.
And so she, that's right. So she insisted that she was the best maker of eggs for her husband for breakfast.
Okay.
And so she imagined she was making eggs in her ovaries. And we used other imagery, of course, like preparing her for this egg retrieval and the procedure. And I taught her breathing easy and mental rehearsal and all the things for that procedure. So she ended up actually producing 5 viable eggs, which was amazing because, as I said, her chances were very slim.
Right.
And so they were frozen for future use. And then it was time for her to have her embryo transfer. And I prepared her for that, making the procedure room more like a sanctuary for this blessed event to occur, to have the embryo implanted into her uterus. And she was able to have sanctity and a wonderful experience with the staff.
Right.
And she became pregnant.
That's great.
And she was so thrilled. And I saw the actual sonogram. It looked like a little bird's nest, right? A little bird's nest with a little baby and a tiny little hand, like kind of waving.
Just waving out at you.
Like waving, hi, Doc.
So you're basically proving that, you can get into the fertile zone on your own, right?
Exactly. So other imagery that I use are things like this. I call her Pachamama, right? The goddess. I brought her
This is like the Muppet Show.
I brought her at 14,000 feet above sea level in this little kiosk to the top of the mountain.
Right.
And a woman was there in the snow selling this. It's made of alpaca. And she's very soft, right?
Wow, that is very
Yes.
soft. Wow.
And so also to use the imagery of the nesting here to prepare for the implantation, the embryo transfer.
Wow. Again, we're I got to say, those are good-looking eggs you got there, Dr. Christine.
Yes.
Great eggs, nice eggs. We got stuff all over the desk. We've had, this is part 4 in a series of 6
Yes.
with our guest, Dr. Christine Silverstein. Of course, you can reach out to her. She's the director at the Summit Center for Ideal Performance. The performance she's talking about today, of course, has to do with fertility and
Yes.
how what she does can help you with her metamorphosis program. And the use of the expectant mind, very,
Yes.
very powerful.
Very
Reach
powerful.
out to her directly, fertilebodyhypnosis.com or idealperformance.net. Those are the 2 websites. You can also call it directly. 201-760-1600. Dr. Christine, as always, it's a pleasure and lots of great information and education, so we appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, and thank you again for joining us. Thank you for watching, and until next time, thank you for joining us here on All Business Media TV.